Thank you so much, Abhijit, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to today's leadership session entitled Planet is the Purpose, Committing to a Decisive Decade of Climate Action. As you all know, KC's vision is to deliver essentials for a better life. And we do this by putting consumers, people, and planet at the heart of our organizational purpose and the purpose of our brands. We also know that the 2020s will bring about some fundamental changes to the operating environment for companies on all three of these fronts. The companies and brands that will thrive will have a resilient business strategy which integrates concepts of sustainability. Or perhaps they have even redefined their business and its role in society. Today's session is about exploring that future in light of a rapidly changing climate. For those who don't know me, I'm Lisa Morden, Head of Sustainability here at KC, and it is a huge honor and privilege to be joined today for our session by Mr. Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations. Welcome, Mr. Ban.
Thank you.
Mr. Ban is an accomplished leader who probably needs little introduction, but I must share a few highlights from his very distinguished career. Mr. Ban has degrees in international relations and public administration and spent 37 years with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Republic of Korea, including serving as the minister. He was appointed to the UN in 2007, serving as the Secretary General for 2 consecutive terms. And throughout his tenure at the UN, Mr. Ban strove to be a bridge builder, to give voice to the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. He successfully pressed for action to combat climate change, an effort that culminated in the adoption and rapid entry into the landmark Paris Agreement in 2016. Mr. Ban worked with the member states of the UN to shape the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to establish UN Women, which has been advancing the organization's work for gender equality and women's empowerment. All of this while continuing with major peace and humanitarian efforts. Mr. Ban continues to be very busy since his time at the UN, serving in several leadership roles, including chairman of the Presidential National Council on Climate and Air Quality, leading the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, and serving as the president of the Assembly and the chair of the Council of the Global Green Growth Institute, just to name a few. Mr. Ban, we are so excited to have you here with us today. I'm a huge fan, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you. May I go? Please go ahead.
Yes, please, sir. Sir, thank you. Before we started our conversation, just a quick note, if you have questions or comments as we go, please add those to the chat function and we will dive right on into those. But Mr. Ban, you know, the 2020s, many have called upon them to be a decisive decade for action if the world's to avert the worst impacts of climate change. And as someone who has been so close to the science and the policies of climate change, how would you characterize the current situation and the trajectory we're on? And particularly, how does this look for Asia Pacific countries?
So may I start now?
Yes, please. Thank you, sir.
Sorry for jumping in early.
No problem.
Thank you, Ms. Lisa Morden, for your warm introduction. And thank you for all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining this Kimberly-Clark APEC staff, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to deliver these opening remarks during today's conversation with the Kimberly-Clark APEC. I take this opportunity to show my deep appreciation to Kimberly-Clark APEC for hosting today's discussion. I applaud your interest in scaling up efforts on decisive climate action and sustainability issues. This is an incredibly important issue in the year 2021 and beyond, as climate change is a true existential threat to our planet and humanity. And all of us simply must elevate our collective urgency and ambition in response. Kimberly-Clark APEC staff, ladies and gentlemen, Climate change is fueling public health, conflict, and migration risks around the world. And these dynamics will continue to worsen in the absence of strong action born out of cooperation, partnership, and renewed political will. 2020 was the second hottest year on record globally, with 2016 the only one hotter. Furthermore, the world's 7 warmest recorded years have all taken place since 2014. The global disruption we have witnessed this year as a result of COVID-19 may be a preview of the chaos soon to be unleashed from cascading climate tipping points unless urgent action is taken to cut CO2 emission. And as the climate crisis continues to deepen with boiling heat waves, surging sea level rise, and apocalyptic wildfires all worsening in scope, we have no time to spare. With this in mind, our pandemic recovery offers a unique and critical opportunity to forge meaningful progress to meet the aspirations agreed under the Paris Climate Agreement. The Paris Agreement provides a collaborative blueprint to ensure the future we want. But we must all work in partnership to realize this future, especially here in Asia-Pacific region, as we are particularly vulnerable. Indeed, make no mistake, the climate crisis is already happening in this region. It is no longer a future threat. Our megacities are suffering from high levels of air pollution. We are uniquely vulnerable to stronger and more frequent cyclones and typhoons. In addition, destructive flooding, heat waves, sea level rise, the drought are all increasing and deeply impacting frontline communities all across the Asia-Pacific. According to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, ESCAP, you know very well, report this, I quote, relentless sequence of natural disasters is beyond what the region had previously experienced, and represents a signs of things to come in the new climate reality, unquote. This is why it is so important for all regional leaders from both government and business to the climate crisis, to respond to the climate crisis in tandem with the efforts to achieve sustainable development. In this regard, the climate crisis, as well as the choices we undertake to address it, is inherently interlinked to the success or failure of the 2030 agenda and its 17 sustainable development goals. As you may see, I'm wearing this UN logo representing 17 targets of sustainable development goals. This has been always with me all the times, everywhere. As the former Secretary General, I'm incredibly proud to have brought the entire world together in cooperation to agree to the UN SDGs in 2015. The 17 SDGs offers us a way forward to solve some of the most critical issues of our time. These include hunger, inequality, public health, gender equality, and crucially, climate action. But to do so, we need to move forward with a renewed sense of necessity. With less than 10 years to go, and climate action is a crucial component in this. Indeed, climate change can no longer be viewed as a standalone issue as it intersects with each and every other SDGs, notably health, inequality, energy, and hunger. This is why UN SDGs and Paris Climate Change Agreement are truly complementary documents. Together, they are known as the UN Global Goals because they represent humanity and our planet's most important vision to ensure our future. And businesses, through the catalyzing power of multi-stakeholder partnerships, have a key role to play to this end. Ladies and gentlemen, to enhance sustainability or combat climate change, neither governments nor businesses can achieve this alone, and the roles they play are not completely separated. There is a concept that the UN Global Compact suggests called the ambition loop. Actions companies take to combat climate change can spur governments to enact stronger policies to help businesses achieve climate goals. In turn, ambitious targets and legislation set by governments to reduce CO2 emissions gives companies greater confidence to invest in climate solutions. This positive ambition loop, in which government policies and private sector leadership reinforce each other, helps both government and companies accelerate action and make further progress on achieving the complementary objectives of the Paris Climate Agreement and the SDGs. This virtuous circle between governments and businesses will be even more needed to ensure an inclusive and sustainable recovery from the current pandemic, since governments alone will not be able to recover from the damages from COVID-19. As such, bold private sector actions are also required to spur governments to take further steps to sustainably rise from the pandemic. The 17 SDGs offer us a viable roadmap for government and business to help synergize the goals into essential drivers of innovation and public-private partnerships. In this regard, continuous dialogue and efforts to spur greater collaboration between governments and the private sector are pivotal. I agree with the idea of my successor under UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who emphasized the need for, quote, a reinvigorated, inclusive, and networked multilateralism, unquote, that goes beyond intergovernmental organizations at the Davos Forum just a few days ago. What I mean is that multilateralism should lead this action, and there is no country in the world, however powerful or resourceful, like the United States or China, they cannot do it alone. We have all put our hands on deck. With this in mind, I'd like to encourage all businesses to participate in the United Nations Global Compact. This is because I believe that the role of UN Global Compact, which provides a platform for dialogue and collaboration between governments and businesses, will be the core of this reinvigorated, inclusive, and networked multilateralism. Dear Kimberly-Clark, APAC staff, ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that COVID-19 has underlined our inherent interconnectedness. Indeed, we are all in this together, and we will all need to ensure that the UN's global goals and local business all around the world, in Asian Pacific region and beyond, the cost of inaction is just too high, too costly. All sectors of society need to engage with the SDGs, and businesses, universities, civil society groups, and engaged global citizens. I'm confident that if we all continue to collectively work together in partnership, push the ambition loop even further, and strive to realize a more reinvigorated, inclusive, and networked multilateralism. We can persevere over the great challenges of both today and tomorrow. The SDGs and Paris Climate Agreement provide the best pathway forward for humanity and our vulnerable planet during this period of pronounced change and uncertainty. This is one that is sustainable, peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous. Let us raise our common efforts and urgency to achieve this transformational vision for all. I thank you for your ongoing efforts and commitment in this regard. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bond. Very serious and dire warnings, but there is room for hope, and we're excited about the possibility of some bilateral engagement and cross-sector partnership and collaboration going forward. The UN's climate conference, COP26, is scheduled to happen in Glasgow later this year, and business has been playing a much more active role around the event in recent years. So many are watching very closely to see what emerges. What might we expect, do you think, particularly now that the US is signaling their return to the Paris Agreement?
There is highest ever expectations, in fact. Each and every COP has had such expectation, but because of canceled and delayed by 1 year COP, while action is more than ever needed, we have been virtually locked down. So there has not been much actions to address climate. But the government has been spending trillions of dollars to fight back COVID-19. This is necessary. I don't complain about that, but my message has always been that they should not put climate package in the backseat. They should do. This is kind of two sides of one coin. Had we done properly, address the climate phenomena, we might not have been challenged by this coronavirus. This we have to understand clearly. Day before yesterday, I addressed the Chatham House based in London, and there came the Minister of State, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who is in charge of all this COP26. And before that, I met Minister Alok Sharma, who is going to be the chairman of this COP26. My message to them was that, first of all, considering all this heightened expectation, first of all, world leaders must raise the ambition level and provide the necessary financial and technological support for those countries who are not able to provide, the developing countries, and forge a stronger global partnership. This is a very strong message. I talked to Minister Trevelyan of the United Kingdom just a few days ago, last month, January 25th. I and the Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, co-chaired the first ever climate adaptation summit where more than 30 world leaders, most of the European leaders, and India, from Pakistan, and Modi, Prime Minister Modi, and Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Korean President Moon Jae-in, and a lot of leaders participated. Only United States was represented by John Kerry because President Biden was just 4 days after his inauguration. So we could understand, but John Kerry conveyed President Biden's strongest possible commitment and global leadership. As you know, US has spend $2 trillion immediately. And John Kerry was appointed as a very high-powered presidential special envoy. We are working together, and I hope that the Asian Pacific region states should do much more on adapting and mitigating. And to another message to COP26 was that please raise the ambition level, and also this ratio of financial support should be both equal footing, like mitigation and adaptation. Until now, just 5% of all the money has been spent on adaptation, 95% on mitigation. So we have to do much more. This has been my message and my expectation. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. The adaptation piece and the business resiliency piece is a big challenge. And just last week, BlackRock announced that they've begun to vote their shares against companies who fail to show progress, not just on the reporting of climate-related emissions, but those who aren't assessing and understanding their climate risk and beginning to build transition plans to a net zero economy. So those are some strong business signals of that need to be thinking about adaptation in addition to mitigation. So it's really great to see that. Some of that work that you did with the Global Commission on Adaptation, that was in conjunction with the Gates Foundation.
Yes,
is that correct?
Right. That was created as soon as I retired from the United Nations. I and Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgieva, who is now managing director IMF, were three co-chair persons. Now, with the starting of a global center on adaptation from Global Commission, with the summit meeting last month, Global Commission has been transferred to Global Center on Adaptation. I'm still the co-chair, but Kristalina Georgieva, because of her work with the IMF, she stepped down, but she's remaining as a board member. Bill Gates also stepped down. So I'm now working together with, I don't know whether you know him, he's also a very distinguished business person in the Netherlands, Feike Sibesma, former chairman of Royal DSM. We are both the co-chair, and there is a very active, committed person who is working as a CEO, like Dr. Patrick Vercoyen. He is a special advisor on World Bank present. Yeah, so we are
very good.
We are still going on. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be so important to see some good projects and examples coming out of some of that work on adaptation and beginning to spur some of the financing and the investing. If we think a little bit about COP26 and its aspiration to really encourage the world to be at net zero emissions as soon as possible, basically, and certainly cutting emissions by half by 2030. There are a lot of challenges that I think businesses and others see related to the financial systems that sometimes can undermine that green transformation. Appreciated your comments about the necessity of climate policy to help incentivize that. But as the world emerges from COVID-19, hopefully not in the too distant future, what are your hopes for a green recovery as governments continue to invest in their recovery from COVID-19 and the economic implications of it?
There are two steps. First of all, by 2030, as you said, we are urging the member states to raise the level of their ambition. This nationally determined contributions, which has to be submitted to the UNFCCC by the end of last year. So by 2030, they should gradually raise this ambition level, how they would mitigate global emission level. Now, our more important priority is how to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, what is known as a net zero 2050, led by the European Union. Now, many countries are now joining this campaign, starting from now Joe Biden administration. He committed net zero 2050, Japan and South Korea. And there are almost 120 countries who are now being committed.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the countries who have already declared that we are going net zero 2050. China announced last September 2060 neutrality, carbon neutrality. That is also most welcome. Considering the amount of global emission level that China has been creating, and also their level of economic development, etc., etc. Still, I think world's experts appreciate and commend the Chinese commitment, the net zero by 2060. So this is now should be implemented by, as you said, transformation of our technology and industrial systems. As you introduced me, I'm now currently working as Presidential Commission's chairman of climate and air quality in Korea. This is a very powerful organization. My recommendation to the government was that all these, cars, internal combustion, fuel cars should be stopped at the latest by 2040. So countries like Norway is already going to be on the road on this from 2023. Most of the country, Europeans, by 2030. But Korea will phase and transform between 2035 and 2040. And I'm also recommending Korean government to phase out all these coal-fired power stations, all by at the latest by 2045, but if possible 2040. So there's a huge transformations are now taking place. Of course, there are concerns from the industries. How can we do it all of a sudden? But I think the engine is, fire is lit now, and there is a strong, push and commitment by the business communities. For example, you should know that POSCO, which is one of the largest steel mill in the world, and maybe one of the largest in Asia too, that has become the first Asian steel mill company to declare net zero 2050. And there are many companies now are joining worldwide renewable energy 100%, renewable RE100. So this is very good campaigns now, commitment. This is a modern campaign now.
Yes, yeah, it's really beginning to move into action, and the momentum is certainly building, and the technology and the innovation behind it is beginning to come through the pipeline, if you will. Let me just shift gears really quickly, and then I would like to be sure that we get some questions from our leadership team and our leaders out listening to the call today. But just one quick shift of the gears, Mr. Bond. Obviously leadership is a key theme for the group gathered to hear today, and it strikes me that you and your career have faced some immense leadership challenges, including convincing member states and the world about the realities of climate change, the need for action, the need to embrace the sustainable development goals, and so forth. Can you share some anecdotes about some of your challenges, how you overcame those, and maybe describe your theory of leadership for the group?
You mean the anecdotes on addressing climate issues or leadership?
Yeah, just leadership in general, I think.
Leadership in general, okay. Everybody may have a different style of leadership. When I was first elected, there was some difficulty for me to convince about myself to the member states and UN staff and the leaders and also global media. Why you are not speaking out loud and loudly, clear and loudly to all these dictators and those people who are not respecting human rights, etc., etc. But all we are now coming from all this Asia Pacific region, so there is clearly some difference in styles, European and Americans and Asian. So Asian, I have been educated and influenced heavily on the Confucianism and the Oriental way of thinking. So whether this quiet diplomacy or soft-spoken leadership is inferior to outspoken leadership, I don't believe so. I have been now lecturing world leaders and the UN staff that I believe in a metaphor, like my leadership is like a water. What do you mean by the leadership by water? Water seemingly doesn't have any color, doesn't have any power, but it has a very significant philosophical concept in leadership. So in 2,600 years ago, a Chinese scholar, he is even born prior to Confucius, Lao Tzu. He said that the highest virtue of leadership is to act like water. The highest of this is what I was told. I don't know how to pronounce in Chinese. How do you pronounce Sangshan Ro Shui? Do you speak some Chinese? Sangshan Ro Shui. This is, I even wrote my calligraphy. It is 4 characters, what Lao Tzu said. I presented to President Obama, look, your leadership, I hope, should be like this. Now, what's the leadership of water? Water flows from top to low, high to low. It does not discriminate. Water covers all the areas where it flows, does not discriminate. Water never stops. If it ever stops and still, and then that means corruption. It goes bad. It goes bad. And water does not unnecessarily confront everybody. Unless it is absolutely necessary. When there is a rock on its flow, then it just avoids. It does not try to roll rocks. But when it is angry, when there's a tsunami or typhoon, then there is no roll, nothing can be staying there. Stones and rocks can be rolled over, and even ferro-steel concrete buildings can be just broken by tsunami. But it does not happen so often. So that's what I have been speaking out to. Use your power when it is absolutely necessary. I have been speaking out publicly and in front of the person. You are like a dictator. How do you want your tombstone be written? Do you want to be remembered as compatriot of your country, or freedom fighter, or dictator. This is what I have been speaking out when it was absolutely necessary, but I never spoke out that way so often. This is my leadership style. And in the end, people were able to understand my leadership. This is, you know what, but I think everybody has a different style, So each of you may have your own style. So if you think it is necessary, it may be good, then you can take some of my advice.
Oh, I think that's a beautiful example. Thank you so much for sharing, Mr. Bond. Okay, why don't we go on ahead and open it up for some questions from the group. Leadership team, I think the instruction is to go ahead and unmute and feel free to ask a question.
Absolutely. I will go first. And Mr. Bond, thank you so much. Really appreciate the encouragement and wisdom. My question is, I love the ambition loop and the idea that business and government will have to cooperate and build upon each other more so than ever. And I know that you have a long career as a diplomat before the United Nations and working throughout the world. We have here many leaders, many CEOs in our businesses throughout Asia, and we are also trying to work more closely with the government. I would love some advice, some words of wisdom and thoughts that you would have for us leaders in different countries as we want to work more closely with governments.
As a Korean diplomat, I have not been dealing with many business people, but as a United Nations Secretary General, I have been meeting and communicating and working together with so many business leaders all around the world. As you know, I was the chairman of UN Global Compact. It has tens of thousands of membership all around the world. What I've been asking them is there should be a global partnership forged strongly. The number 17 goal of sustainable SDG is a global partnership. As I said, without the global partnership among government, business community, and civil society, those are tripartite partnership. So it can stand very solid. If you have just the government and business community bilateral partnership, so it is still you can stand, but it's not perfect. There should be a civil society aspect, partnership. But more important role, it is the business leaders who really mobilize necessary funding, and they are the pioneers in having science and technology development and research. So they can invest in future-oriented science and technology, and they can mobilize all this. So my message has always been that you have a very important role. No political leaders will be successful if their national economy does not work, does not perform well. Nobody can be elected. Immediately they can, fail in the election when the national economy goes well. And then what's the role of the business leaders? There are 10 principles in UN Global Compact, starting from good business and labor relationship and transparency and gender equality and human rights, etc., etc. These are the examples which you have to show as a business leaders. But it is also applied to government leaders. Only difference is that they are not dealing with the business. They provide a nice, very workable guidelines, business rules and practices, and they go by this one. that is principles and rules-based business activities. Why then the civil society is important? They are the ones who can really watch and carefully watch how business leaders and how government leaders, political leaders are performing their mandate. So they can be always a source of constructive criticism, not criticism for the sake of criticism. So they are for sake some very good criticism. So we have to have three tripartite partnership should always stand. Then when you have a 3 feet, you can stand much on a stable way. This is what I'm asking you. Be proud. There is nothing which you cannot do this time. At this time, you can mobilize. At this time, what I'd like to also emphasize is that you might have heard a lot of talks about what is known ESG, environment, social, and governance. How to have good governance, effective governance, accountable governance, and workable governance is very important. And also you should pay strict attention that without carrying the nature, your business cannot succeed. And you should also have compassion, working for others. So all this is, so we have to work always closely in partnership. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Do we have any other questions from the audience so far? I do have a couple in our chat that I can read out, but we'll keep the lines open for any APLT members.
I have a question. Thank you so much for a very inspiring talk. That was great to listen to. With COVID-19, there's been a lot of concerted effort by the government and the businesses to work together to find a solution in such a short amount of time. Climate change arguably is going to have a lot bigger impact and potentially a bigger death toll as well. What do you think will create the urgency for governments and businesses to act like they've done with COVID-19?
At this time, I think it is absolutely necessary that we fight back COVID-19. Then the economic performance has been very much affected. There are many, particularly smallholder farmers, smallholder business people. They are the one worst hit. The big businesses, I think they have a way to manage. They have basically funds, necessary financial stability. But I'm very much sorry and painful to see so many small shopkeepers and restaurant owners and et cetera. They are the one hit hardest. Then that's why many governments who can afford, like including Korea, they are using a lot of additional supplementary budgets to help people out of this. At the same time, if we look beyond this COVID-19, I'm sure that sometime this year, we'll be able to overcome this COVID-19 with the vaccines now being used by the people. Then you have to look the deeper roots why this has happened. This is first of all, we have been not taking care properly our nature. The scientists say that there may be at least 1 million viruses dormant, now frozen on the the Arctic ice. The Antarctica and Arctic regions are now being melted. So if these are melt, I think there will be more and more unknown viruses will attack our humanity. And it is very important that caring for business is okay, but we should care our ecological systems. That is a very important lessons which we have to learn from this COVID-19. That's why, what if I may just quote one thing, the Pope Francis had the press interview May last year. He said that about the COVID-19, he was not sure if the COVID-19 was because of the wrath of God, nature. But it is surely the response of nature and God. And he even told me that God always forgives, and human beings sometimes forgives. It's true that politicians and people, they sometimes, when they are good, they are good mood, they forgive. But he said, nature never forgives. So we have to, we cannot negotiate with the nature. We have to follow the voices and the trend of the nature. By walking smoothly, following the natural trend, we can prosper our business, and we can also make our lives much more prosperous and livable. This is my message to you at this time.
Thank you for that great question. So why don't we go to our online questions, and we're going to take some of the questions that have the most votes from the audience, Mr. Bond. The first one here talks about the fact that Kimberly-Clark is very interested in environmental management, but sometimes there can be conflicts between corporate short-term performance and environmental sustainability. In this case, what advice would you have for us about wise choices that we can make?
Of course, everybody wants to be successful in a short term, but don't rush. If you eat too fast, you will have a stomach trouble. That is something which we have to learn from our lives. You need to be, first of all, follow all these rules and guidelines which have been provided by the scientists, experts, and most importantly, we have to listen to the voices of our nature in a metaphorical way. So nature has been sending strong warnings. I think this, as Pope Francis said, this COVID-19 may be one of those warnings from the nature. So we have to really tighten ourselves and work on a climate-friendly, climate-resilient way. You are the business leaders, then my advice for you to invest in business, that your business investment should be made in a climate resilient way, whether it be energy, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be agriculture or science and technology. If it is not climate resilient, climate friendly, I think your business cannot be successful. And that's what we have learned from so many failures, so many natural disasters which we have seen. Natural disasters, can we prevent natural disasters? We may not be able to completely prevent the tsunamis and hurricanes and cyclones, but there are very good examples if we look at all these facts, for example, in 1970, Cyclone Bola, which hit Bangladesh, killed minimum 300,000 people in just 7 days. It must have hit, other areas too, but particularly Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a still poor country. Then, as a Secretary General, I visited Bangladesh many times and spoke to Prime Minister Hasina that you should invest more, to adapt to this kind of prevent future shocks. Now, just 2 years ago, when almost the same size of cyclone Amphan hit Bangladesh, there were only 95 casualties, 95, because they have made all the shelters in advance, and they have heightened the banks of the rivers and seashores, and et cetera, et cetera. Even 1 or 2 casualties are very sorry and very sorry for that. But just to compare 300,000 and less than 100. This is the lessons, like in Caribbean countries like Dominica. Just in 2018, this hurricane just crushed this country with more than 200% of their GDP. This is a terrible. So we can prevent this one to the minimum, if we work and invest wisely and adapt wisely.
It's a really great lead into the next question here, which is, can you share any countries or companies that you think have been particularly successful in implementing the 17 SDG initiatives or even climate resiliency programs and activities? What can we learn from them, and how can we emulate them?
Well, since I'm not dealing with all this business as a professional way, but as I just briefly mentioned, this, Google and all these big global businesses, and they're now emphasizing the importance of using renewable energy. So I understand that almost 300 big global companies are now joining. In Korea, like SK and some others are already joining this renewable energy 100% campaign. That's the way we can reduce global gas emissions. We may not completely eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. Still, you have to use something at this time particularly. But by 2050 and 2100, then we should have a much cleaner and safer energy. By that time, people may not be using all these combustion, internal combustion engines like gasolines or whatever it may be. People may depend heavily on renewable energy. That's the way the business can be successful without naming any country, any company, yes.
And some of those companies are actually aspiring to carbon positive, aren't they? Sort of more regenerative in their solutions as they go forward. So going to renewables and beyond. So very, very interesting case studies to follow indeed. Mr. Bond, thank you so much for your time. Before we wrap up today, I'd just like to invite Aaron back up to the panel, I think, to say a few closing words today.
Yeah, well, I will be very, very brief. But Mr. Bond, I just want to thank you for your time, for your encouragement. This is very important to all 13,000 Kimberly-Clark APAC employees, and we're going to work hard to be a good partner and citizen of this earth. thank you for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you. I wish you all the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Take care. Thank you so much, team. I think, team, we were going to just take a couple of minutes to do some reflections after Mr. Bond exits the panel here. Aaron, anything that you wanted to comment on? I had some thoughts that I'll add to your comments, if you don't mind.
I mean, just to be super brief, in a way, and like Lisa, you won't have the same context, but you know Pete very, very well. Pete Docamera helped shake up our thinking yesterday, and you've known Pete for a long time. Just has you think in a different way and has you broaden it. And so many of us are just in the month, in the day, in the moment. So Pete helped broaden in one direction. Mr. Bond, who obviously is a critical leader, perhaps the critical leader in terms of global warming, the Paris Agreement, the rest of it, is helping us